Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Controversial Truth Podcast. I'm here with my friend Alex because Tony is out today. Well, for the next couple of weeks, he is on a road trip to California and back to the wonderful state of New York. I think he's going down south and then coming up around. So if you guys are praying people, be praying for him and for safe travel for him and his wife. And so anyway, over the next couple of weeks while he's gone, I'm going to be having different people on the podcast, basically just to have some conversation. So Alex is the first one. He volunteered, so thank you again for that.
Absolutely.
And we're just going to have a conversation basically about, might be political, might be worldview. We haven't talked in forever, so we'll just kind of,
should be good.
Yeah, we'll just kind of go off a couple questions I got here, and when we find some stuff that we disagree on, we'll go from there. So
Cool.
see what it's about, because that's kind of what we've been trying to find some more controversial topics. I don't know if you checked any of the episodes out or anything like that, but yeah, no problem. So yeah, we just kind of try to keep it as controversial as possible, which is the name of the topic or the name of the show. So
Cool.
So anyway, the first question I've got here, basically is just to kind of get it, like I said, get us started. Would you consider yourself religious in any way?
That's a tough one. I don't consider myself religious in the fact that I would put a name to my beliefs.
Okay.
Because I don't really know what I believe in, to be honest with you, as it comes, in regards to like a higher power or anything like that. In regards to like morals and stuff, I think I'm pretty in line with most religions, Christianity and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't call myself religious, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kind of like agnostic then, like undecided, but you're you
not atheist.
Right.
No.
Okay. So you think there is some sort of higher power, but you just don't really have a name for it necessarily. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so it's been something I've been thinking a lot about lately, whether it's an actual like higher power or if it's your own self.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's I think that's where a lot of people reside, honestly, like at least of the demographics of people that I've talked to, I think most people that have, at least that aren't religious, kind of fall in that category. I think there's a big movement in the like atheistic community, but I think that the vast majority of people, when you talk to them, they're like, I can't really get on board with there being absolutely nothing out there. But some people do. I obviously, as a Christian, would disagree with that, but I definitely think that most people I've met kind of that aren't religious kind of fall into that category.
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, if you had asked me if I was an atheist, I'd been like, yep, sure I am. But when you really dive into it, I think a lot of them, they believe in something.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't think most atheists are actually even truly atheists.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that when they really do the thought of like how things could possibly get started without any outside cause from the universe, I think you'd kind of have a difficult time wrapping your head around
just the thought of not believing in something is pretty scary.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like to say, no, I don't believe in any of that.
Yeah, like that old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes.
Yeah.
Like when you're faced with the reality of your potential death or something, you're like, I don't know if I actually believe in nothing.
Right.
But yeah, that kind of actually brings me to my next question. So you said like 10 years ago, if I'd asked you, you would have probably said you were an atheist. So what in between those years from then to now kind of changed it for you?
It's honestly the most recent, it's probably been like the past year or two, I've really taken a dive into it.
Okay.
When I was younger, my teens, I went through a lot in regards to, I had a couple friends commit suicide through my high school career. And it just like destroyed everything I believed in, everything I thought I knew, all that stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I didn't have something to blame for it, so I blamed God and religion.
Yeah.
I remember the first IMAT I went to, somebody came up to me and they're like, hey, we want to talk to you about God. And I was like, I don't believe in it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, the one thing I remember being told, God wouldn't put you through something you can't handle. Obviously, I was like, I got a couple of friends that say otherwise. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So I just had so much resentment, and I blamed a lot of that on God.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, I was like, nope, not real. There's no way, because my friends wouldn't have been in that position had there been actually a God.
Yeah.
But recently I've been diving into that, like I said, and I think I was trying to put it to a group or a specific belief rather than the individual.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
and
yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? So I've been
you.
trying to decipher between those two things lately, and it's kind of when I realized, like, man, I don't really not believe in stuff out there, you know? There's a lot that breaks down to the individual rather than trying to blame something so horrible on, you know, a religion or God even, you know? So.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good thing to have a realization, even if it doesn't involve religion necessarily.
Yeah.
And just as a practicality of taking responsibility, you know, individually.
Yeah.
People doing that, because I think a lot of times that's where we're at right now, even in society to an extent, is like people just blaming everything on the overarching issue or the overarching I don't know, political landscape, I guess, if you will, and instead of just taking personal responsibility for things.
I think that's got a lot to do with identity politics. You know, they're trying to throw everything into a group.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that's where a lot of people, that's probably where I got that mindset. I was like, well, I need something to blame. Here's a group I can blame.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's definitely an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
For sure.
Definitely.
So did you grow up then as like somebody who was kind of involved, or not involved, but growing up in religion, I guess I should say? Was your family religious?
Yeah, not extremely. You know, I remember when I was younger going to Sunday school, stuff like that. Go to church holidays kind of things, but outside of church, there wasn't really, we didn't pray at dinner. We didn't do that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It wasn't really ever, we didn't talk about it much outside of church. You know, it was kind of going through the motions, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of big at the, you know, especially then at the time, you know, it's like, I feel like everybody I knew went to church.
That's what a family does.
Yeah, exactly. It was just kind of what everybody did. That was kind of the same way that we were, you know, growing up, kind of the same exact thing. I mean, obviously, you know, later on in life, I kind of just decided to make that decision, something that I actually wanted to do and walk as, you know, out in life. But yeah, this is kind of the same thing. Just go to church because that's what you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned like the identity politics and stuff like that, and kind of how that, you know, plays into it. So that was actually kind of my next question, just to see how, well, now that we know like your new kind of look on life, how has that affected you looking at, you know, society or politics and stuff like that? Has that changed your political view at all over the years? Or maybe you didn't even have one before. A lot of people.
Yeah, and I never really had a political view. It's hard to right now, even more than ever. You know, it's kind of like I said,
you believe.
Right. Yeah, it's so hard. You want to be informed, but you can't trust any of the information out there. So it's like, do I know what's going on actually? Or, you know, but I don't think it's changed. Like I said, I've always had a core set of values and morals, and I think, you know, it all comes down to the individual, and it's real hard. It's tough, man. Like even this year, you know, you want to vote because you feel like you got to be part of trying to make a change, but it's like,
what do I do? Your hands are kind of tied.
Yeah,
I hear you on that one.
Yeah, I don't think my political views have changed. I think I'm definitely more educated on a lot more topics as I dive into it and as I try and pick apart different things. But I think my core values and stuff like that haven't changed much.
Gotcha. Cool. So I guess we'll go back then, because I mean I'm kind of in a similar boat on as far as political stuff and those things go. I mean, I definitely have, like you said, a core set of values that kind of dictates what my politics are, but as far as most of it, I'm kind of the same way, where it's just like I don't know what to believe necessarily because there's so much stuff out there. I mean, I really don't think
too much information.
Yeah, too much information, and it's too hard to believe anybody on either side. I mean, so I definitely would kind of just find myself in the center and just being like, I think all of you are wrong. For the most part, you know, I think there might be a few genuine people involved in politics, but for the vast majority of them, I have a hard time believing that they're doing it for the good of anyone other than themselves.
If anyone tells me that I'm one side through and through, that's enough of that. I'm not going to listen to what you're saying because it's all biased.
Yeah, exactly. And I think more people could benefit from kind of taking that stance on things instead of being so polarized.
No, absolutely.
That's why we're at where we're at with this nation.
That's exactly
really.
why.
Just It's crazy. But
Yeah.
anyway, I wanted to kind of, yeah, because like I feel like we're gonna find most of the stuff that we will probably agree on politically.
Yeah.
So I feel like let's kind of focus on the religious side of things, then, because I think that's where we'll probably find a little bit of contention.
Yeah.
Between the two of us. So, like I said, obviously I'm a Christian and stuff, so I have not only the belief that there is a God, but also that he's the God of Scripture, and that Scripture is, so Christians kind of vary on this, but I believe that the Bible is actually God breathed, that it's actually the Word of God, transcribed through human writings, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So anyway, what would be your biggest dilemma with believing an actual, like, because you said you believe in some sort of higher power, but what would be your biggest dilemma now with believing in whether, not even necessarily Christianity, but just an actual religion of any kind?
I feel like I'm gonna try and say this without being offensive in any way.
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
I think it's kind of like you're putting all your eggs in a basket, but for me, it's like, is that basket even there?
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? And it's with the Bible, it's, a lot of, if you take it quite literal, I think it can be dangerous. But on the flip side of that, if you don't take any of what the Bible says, I think that's also dangerous. I think there's a lot of good teachings in it.
Yeah.
I think if you break it down like a book, then I think there's a lot of positivity in it. But if you can take it quite literally, and the problem with taking it literally is, what's the actual meaning of it?
Yeah,
that's why there's so many different branches and
denominations.
denominations. It's like, well, who's right? And I guess that's always been my biggest thing. How can you believe in all of it when there's so many different branches? You know what I'm trying to say?
Because somebody's got to, either somebody's right or all of it's wrong, is what you're saying, basically. And how do you know which one is right? So that's a good point. Actually, one of the reasons for doing this podcast, my friend Tony and I, we started off as completely separate sides of the aisle as far as Christians are concerned. He was very on the like Baptist side, kind of less spiritual side of things, and I was the opposite. I'd been raised in a church that was on that more kind of less spiritual side, and when I actually became a Christian and actually started to walk as a Christian rather than just saying it and doing all the stuff that I was doing before, I found a lot of solace in the spiritual side of things. So we started on completely separate sides of the aisle. We've been friends for a while now, years, and so anyway, we kind of started like this probably like 3 or 4 years ago. We were kind of like, all right, we have some disagreements on quite a few things. And so like, let's just read the Bible, and we're just going to read it for what it says and not try to put our own spin on what it's saying. Like just literally read it. And what we found was, when we did this, now we agree on like almost everything. Like there's very few topics we disagree on. And so it's kind of like, and there was no, like, we weren't like, oh, so let's do a podcast. When it was just one of those things where it just kind of happened to be that way. And so it's kind of like a testament to us, where it's like, oh, maybe the Christian church actually could come together and be a little less separated and a little less denominational and always fighting and bickering with one another if they actually just read it. And what we found was a lot of the things that we had been taught growing up, from his side or my side, was people taking the Bible and reading things into what it was saying, kind of putting their own spin on it, sort of thing. And if you just kind of read it for what it says and take it at face value for the most part, we found that it actually worked. And so to answer your question, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the denominations, that the divides in the church cause so many people, such as yourself, to be like, this doesn't even make any sense. Like, why would I believe something and take it literally if you guys can't, who are supposed to be the ones that know what it's saying, can't even agree on it? So I completely agree with you. It's a difficult thing to wrap your head around when there's so much
navigate. It's tough.
For sure. So that's as far as the Bible goes. So you mentioned that you do like some of the morality that comes from the Bible. But what would you think as far as like ultimate morality? Do you think there is an ultimate morality, or do you think that it's kind of subjective to each person?
I think there is. I think there is an ultimate morality. I think really if you do something that's not right, I think most of the time you have a gut feeling where you know whether it's right or it's not right.
Okay.
You know, I truly believe that. Obviously, there's some mental illnesses that can, you know, kind of sever that idea. But I do. I think family values have a lot to play with that too. You know, I think a lot with your upbringing in general. You know, but yeah. Yeah,
I would definitely agree that upbringing plays a big part in that. Yeah, you can get into the sort of mental illness side of things and how that's played out in different people, and you know, whether it be historic people like Hitler or something like that, you know, or you take an extreme example. But yeah, I definitely think that if you didn't have an ultimate set of morality, then it would be difficult for anybody to truly have any morality that would be able to be translated into law or anything like that without that ultimate set. But I think that that's a lot of things like right now, at least in our culture, is this like relativism is what it's called. It kind of like everybody is kind of their own moral gauge, and you know what you think is right, and that's hard for me because it's like it's kind of self-defeating in a sense, because of the fact that if you know everybody determines what's right based on their own subjective values, then basically all you've got is anarchy.
Yeah, and that's a scary thing.
Right. So for me, with that in mind, I guess that's kind of one of the things that like really points me to there has to be a religion of some kind. You know, whether it's Christianity, whether it's you know Islam, whatever it is. Obviously, I've made my choice, but I think that there has to be some sort of way that the God, you know, whatever the higher power is, has translated its or his, you know, in some sense, down to us so that we can know what that is beyond just our conscience, right? Because everybody has different things in their conscience. Like I would agree that like kind of within everybody there is like don't murder, you know, don't do the crazy things. But when it comes to like smaller things that you know not necessarily like for instance, Christians shouldn't have sex outside of marriage. You know what I mean? That's not really something that's built into somebody's conscience. Some people would feel guilty about it more because of like upbringing and religious values. But most people, I would say, probably don't inherently have that as like a don't do that sort of thing, you know? So that's where I'm kind of like, for me, it kind of boils down to there has to be some sort of not only moral principle that you know encompasses everyone, but a way for everyone to know what that moral principle is and what is expected of us. You know what I mean? If there is a God. So what do you think about that? As far as, I mean, I know you kind of already elaborated a little bit on the scriptures, but
like I guess that example that you know don't have sex outside of marriage. That's obviously a lot of people don't agree with that.
Right. Of course, yeah.
I don't think that's a major one. I don't think that's something that laws need to be put into place.
No, of course not. No,
and I think that is a bigger difference. I think outside of your morality and your core values, I think that is where I did separate more from the Bible. Is more of like the rule setting rather than morals. You know what I mean? Like there's some things. I can't think of a specific example, but some things I don't agree with as a rule. As a life rule. You know, I think, like I said, core values and morals, as long as you got those in mind, I think you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn from them and be a better person.
But I guess my maybe I probably didn't explain it very well, but like, so you would agree that there's a higher moral compass, I guess I should say. But if there's nothing set in stone, if you will, what's to say that somebody doesn't come along and say, well, you think murder's wrong, but I think it's okay because my higher moral compass tells me that that's okay. And there's been people obviously that, you know, that say that. So, you know, yes, on something small as like having sex before marriage, that's irrelevant. It doesn't really affect anyone all that much on on a physical level or cause any harm. But without this thing being set in stone or having the Bible or something written down or something where we can all kind of, you know, gather around and say, this is what is right and this is what's wrong. What keeps somebody, like I said, from from saying that, well, your moral compass is wrong if you think that murder is wrong. You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's tough. I think nowadays, especially with the current situation, there's a lot of things that are being questioned like that. You know, there's a lot of core values and morals that are like, well, just because you've been taught that and that you really believe that, what makes that right? I don't know. I don't think. So you're kind of asking ultimate morality. Do I think that there's something that kind of placed that into?
Well, I think we would agree that something placed it,
Yeah.
because you already expressed that you do believe there is at least a higher power. So
Yeah.
obviously that would have placed the moral value. What I'm asking is, how do we know beyond an internal feeling
Yeah.
what is moral and what's not? Because I mean, I think, like you said, most everyone would agree on the big things, but obviously you've got big things, you got small things, you got some things in the middle and stuff. So
Right.
at what point
So where do we draw the line?
right,
and
where do
how
we draw the
decide?
line without an actual line or something written or something that we can all say objectively this is what the standard is, rather than subjectively through our own feeling and being like, I feel like this is okay,
Right.
I feel like this is wrong, because obviously everybody, barring psychopaths, feels like murder is wrong.
Right.
Then if you go a step down, everyone would feel like rape is wrong for the vast majority, but there's probably
Right.
a little less, probably more people that agree with rape being fine than murder, you know what I mean? So
Right.
you keep going down the line, and eventually you find, okay, maybe it's a 50-50 split now.
Yeah.
So that's my question, I guess, is how do we know what this ultimate morality is without something written down?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that was the hope that the government was put in place for. I think the overall majority,
That's a fair assertion.
but that's kind of tough to.
Yeah. Well, honestly,
Kinda put that.
I've never heard that expressed, because I've asked people this question before.
Yeah.
I've had similar conversations.
Yeah, I think that was probably the idea behind that, is that there was going to be a party of people that represented the overall population, to keep society in check, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's what government's goal definitely should be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, our government allowed slavery, in
Correct.
the 1800s. So it's like they're
Right.
clearly not the arbiters of morality,
Yeah.
because if we
Yeah,
just go off
100%.
majority rules, which basically is what our government is and should be, well,
Right.
to an extent. So if everybody just decided tomorrow that, X, Y, or Z was okay, and the government was
Yeah.
like, all right, that doesn't necessarily, you would agree that doesn't make it right.
Right.
Just because.
Yeah, I think you'll always have that. Like you said, I think slavery was allowed by the government, put in place by the government.
Yeah.
I think we can probably both agree that was probably America's biggest sin.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think, I've been thinking lately with the whole, with the trans movement and the gender politics right now.
Mm-hmm.
I questioned the other day, I thought maybe we allowed slavery to happen. We allowed racism to happen for so long. Is there a chance that this big push right now is simply because we don't want to let that happen again? Or do you think there's a motive behind the whole movement?
I think it's a little bit of both. I
Yeah.
mean, me personally, obviously, as a Christian, I think that, we're made in the image of God, and I think that every person has value because of because God created them in his image, so
Yeah.
I would obviously fundamentally disagree with sex change and things of those nature, not getting into the science of it or anything like that, but I
Right.
do think it's a mental illness that could be overcome in other means. Like I can't remember who it was, but somebody was talking and I was like, this is a pretty good point. If take schizophrenia, for example, most scientists would agree that gender dysphoria is what they call is a mental illness.
Yeah.
And so if you take schizophrenia, which is another mental illness, completely different, but same category.
Right.
And somebody that has schizophrenia thought that they were a duck. We don't be like, oh, we're going to treat that by making this person into a duck.
Yeah.
We treat it by telling them, no, that's not reality. That's not what you are. You're this. You are a
Right.
human, and you need to stay a human. You don't get to transition into a duck simply
Right.
because that's what you think. You know what I mean? And so it's the same kind of concept. I mean, it's obviously less extreme.
Right.
But, if somebody's a male biologically and they want to be a female, I think that the most or the most healthy way to treat that on a scientific level is not to be like, well, we'll just give you what you want then, even though it, you know, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that it is both a movement, like you said, kind of, you know, because they feel oppressed, kind of like what slaves were. I'm not comparing in any way, shape, or form, because I don't think it's at all fair to say that they're oppressed in the way that slaves are, people of color were at all.
Not implying that.
But I know what you were saying. You weren't saying that. But yeah, I do think that there are plenty of people out there, you know, in the trans community and you know, 10 years ago in the homosexual community that, you know, felt oppressed by the government. And I'm of the mindset, and you'll find a lot of Christians that don't agree with me here on this point. I don't think that there should be laws or anything to keep people from doing what they want, because I think that ultimately, you know, if I force you to be a Christian on the sense of laws, by government force down, I haven't changed your heart at all. I haven't helped you actually come into a relationship with God. I've just forced you to do something you didn't want to do, you know what I mean? So I don't agree with making laws to, you know, make people to comply to my set of values. You know what I mean? But I do think that there is a line in the sand at some point, you know, where we have to draw it and we have to say, okay, you know, if you continue to let this happen, what's the next thing? So I mean, you take the transgender,
and that's the tough part, right? Where's the line?
Exactly. That's where I kind of keep cycling back to. And I think that you know, if you know, you had the homosexuality movement, which, you know, is still going, but, you know, was prevalent, you know, 10, 20 years ago. And now the transgender movement, what's the next thing? Is the next thing, because I've been hearing people talk about the next thing being letting pedophilia be okay, you know, because if it's just a feeling inside you, if it's just, oh, I love this person. There's
been small hints at that in the media, right, where they're saying that it's an illness almost, and, you know, there's stuff like that, which I hope that is never lessened as the crime that it is.
Right. Yeah. Of course. And I think the vast majority of people would 100% agree with that.
I would absolutely hope so.
I think even the vast majority, well, probably all of the majority of the trans movement would agree that no, pedophilia is not okay. It's a very minute, you know, fragment of people that are I think that I've heard are pushing for this thing. But it was a minute part of trans, you know, movement back, you know, maybe 20 years ago. Now it's, look where it's come, you know. So I mean, 20 years ago, two people might have been having the same conversation, being like, well, you know, I'm okay with the homosexuality thing, but I don't really want to see people transitioning from one gender to another.
Well, I think the difference there, and I hope that the difference can be seen, is that with homosexuality and the trans movement, nobody's really getting hurt.
Right, of course.
You know, and there is, I mean, I guess you could argue that letting children make such a huge decision. I mean, because there are states where you can be 12 and get start having procedures done
without parental consent.
Right, and I don't think that's right, you know. I could argue that is allowing somebody to hurt themselves without really understanding things yet.
Yeah. I mean, even tattoos. We're not allowed to get tattoos. And
thank God.
Yeah, right.
Thank God I couldn't get a tattoo at 15, man. Right. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be good.
We'd all gone broke.
It's not like that. I would have some dumb things on my body, for sure. But, I mean, obviously those two are different, but a dumb law saved me some really stupid tattoos.
Yeah. Those two are vastly different. I would agree with that. But, I mean, it's the same concept in the sense, like, the tattoo thing is a much smaller issue,
right?
But we're against kids getting tattoos because we understand that kids' minds are not fully developed and that they can't make those life-altering decisions.
Right. And not saying that some of those children actually do have it figured out, where that's actually who they are, but you know, I think there's science to prove that there's the other side of that coin too, where some of them didn't have it figured out, and you know, now they're dealing with some repercussions of that. But that's a huge, difficult topic in its own. But.
Yeah, it's definitely one that's tough to talk about.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
you want to be as understanding as possible, and you want to, you know, be compassionate and show empathy, but it's hard when you truly don't understand something.
Yeah, and I mean, most people don't understand. They can empathize with it, but they can't necessarily sympathize in the sense that, you know, the vast majority of people haven't gone through that. They don't understand what it's like to feel like you're the other gender. And I mean, I do empathize with that. I do empathize that, you know, it's got to be difficult. I mean, there's days, you know, when everybody struggles with depression here and there, you know, you just feel down about something. You feel like you're something, your circumstances can be absolutely wonderful, but you feel terrible and you're just like, what's wrong with me, you know? And so it's I feel like it's that, but on an extreme level every day. So I definitely empathize with it. And, you know, but at the same time, I can't necessarily, and it all comes back to that, where you draw that line in the sand, you know what I mean? Because for me, obviously, you know, I believe that the Bible is accurate, but I come back to that. How do we know where that line is without something written? Because other than that, all you've got is just subjectivity of people saying this is right and this is wrong based on my own, you know, my own feelings.
Right.
So it's kind of a difficult thing for me anyway.
Yeah.
To understand. Yeah. Based on that.
Definitely.
So would you, I guess, now that we've kind of talked that through, I suppose, do you think there's any, obviously you agree with the Bible in the sense of what it teaches, but you just disagree with
for the most part,
right, for the most part. Would you think that there's any way that you'd ever actually look at it and say, okay, this is true, this is not true? Like can you give me some specific examples, I guess, of something in the Bible that you know of that you're like, I can't get on board with that?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay. So, is there anything other than the Bible itself that you think religion has produced that kind of, I know you said, you know, before when you were younger that, you know, kind of the whole, and this is a regular thing that people talk about, is like, okay, there's so much pain and suffering in the world, how can there be a loving God? Is there anything like that isn't necessarily involved in scripture that you're like, okay, this concept or this way things are kind of also points me away from religion itself?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, if you do think of it like that, you know, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, but it's hard to see so much tragedy in the world and say, oh, there's somebody taking care of everyone, because you know, not everyone's taken care of. Yeah. You know, and that's what takes us back to the individual, and that's, I think, this whole existence and our whole experience is all everyone just trying to navigate through life without experiencing as much tragedy as possible. But I think a lot of people inflict it more than others, obviously, but I don't know. It's tough. It's hard. And that's where I'm at. I think it's more by the individual than a higher power.
So as far as like, you know, somebody, just to give an example, somebody does something stupid, it screws up their life, you would obviously blame that on the individual, not God. But like, take something example. Let's just go back to Hitler, for example, the extremity of the Holocaust. Like, obviously, the Jews that were slaughtered by the millions they didn't do anything necessarily to deserve that. You know what I mean? So how would you reconcile that with God? Do you think that, would you blame something like that on God, or how do you wrap your mind around something like that?
No, I wouldn't blame something like that on God. I suppose, you know, it's, one guy had a lot of power, too much, and a lot of people. I was listening to a online lecture, and the idea was that there was a lot of people like you and me that were on the side of the Germans, and that's something really hard to wrap your head around. Yeah, they were in that time, they were in that area, and they ended up doing something that they knew was wrong, but they went with the group.
Yeah, it's scary how many people, out of whether it be fear of, you know, persecution from the German government or whatever it be, you know, there was a lot of people historically that went along with it. And, you know,
not all those people agreed with it. Not all those people thought that should be happening. And yeah, I guess that kind of contradicts my first thought. If I can't blame that on God, then why could I blame all the other suffering on God, if there was one? Right.
So, I mean, that's a good response too, because I mean, most people, at least that I've talked to in the past, they jump on any opportunity like that to be like, yeah, you know, it's definitely God. So I mean, I definitely respect that opinion that you know, even on something like a mass scale like that, it still kind of comes down to like, this dude was a bad dude, and one thing led to another sort of thing, which is definitely what I would tend to agree with. I believe that we live in a fallen world, that God gives us our choice to do what we want to do, and he as much as he does uphold the world, I believe, by his hand, I think that it's still kind of it turns on its own. You know what I mean? He set it up so that it kind of just goes on its own, sort of thing. And the same thing with people. Like if you want to do something wrong, then that's completely and totally your decision, and those consequences will not only befall you, but could befall around people around you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, I think that's a pretty admirable stance, because most people do just want to kind of pass it off, whether it be on God or somebody around them. So that's cool.
Yeah. On the other side of that coin, I think when great things happen, people do great things. It almost frustrates me a little when people say, "Oh, without God, this wouldn't have happened." Me, I'm like, give yourself some credit.
Yeah. Okay.
You put yourself here.
Yeah.
If God was giving everybody the tools to do what you did, then everybody would be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? But you made this happen. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see that, and I agree with you to an extent. I mean, obviously, I believe that, like the scripture says, all good things are from God, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, if, I don't know, take some silly example, I do something good at work or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean God came down and like directed my hand literally and, put it on there. So I do think there are some people that are a little extreme on that sense. They're like, God did literally everything. And, I definitely wouldn't agree with that. But on the other side of things, I also think that it's easy to get arrogant if we don't give credit to God where it's due. You know what I mean? But yeah, I definitely understand that line of thinking for sure. Yeah. There's a lot of Christians that almost are silly with how much they give, and I don't mean to detract from the glory that God is due, in my opinion, but I definitely agree with you on that. It's kind of weird sometimes where you're just like,
you didn't do all of it,
right? Yeah, and I think a lot of times it presents itself in false humility too, which is never a good thing. Somebody compliments you on something, you're like, I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. It's like just
like imposter syndrome too. It's like I don't deserve this. I don't deserve that kind of thing too. Yeah. You might truly think you don't deserve it, so you gotta
pass it off. Yep. Yeah, that can. Yeah, it can come out in many different ways.
Yeah.
My next question that I was going to get to was then kind of maybe we'll probably wrap it up on this, is what do you think happens to you after death then?
I would honestly probably say nothing.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like cease to exist then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the world just keeps turning,
Yeah.
Thought about death a lot, obviously, with everything that happened when I was younger. It forced me to think about it.
Yeah, of course.
And even when I was young, I remember having such crazy anxiety about it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was like 7 or 8 years old, and one day I just thought, wait a minute, this all goes away at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Instant panic attack. First panic attack I ever had.
Yeah.
Called my dad crying. But yeah, I mean, obviously I stopped thinking about it because I was 8, played with toys and forgot about it. But unfortunately, man, I think the world just keeps turning. I don't think there's like a heaven and a hell.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking this the other day. I was thinking about heaven and hell, oddly enough, but I think a lot of people are already living in their own personal hell, and I think a lot of people are living in their own personal heaven.
Yeah.
They could have everything they want. Maybe they aren't as happy as they could be, but maybe there are some people that are. And I was thinking about everything that's going on, all the people with all their beliefs right now, and I was thinking about how someone can just push the Bible and be like, well, this is false, you're wrong, essentially, and you're gonna go to hell. And I thought, you're almost putting that person in their own personal hell already.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So telling them that is creating this mental space where they might not believe in God, they might not believe in heaven and hell, but that thought is in their head that what they're doing is wrong and they're damned forever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something as a Christian I've always grappled with, and I've kind of evolved, so to say, over the years of my faith, and how I present that, because obviously I do believe that there is a heaven and a hell, and I've always kind of wondered, like, how do I present this to people in a way that's not, like, one, judgmental, and two, in a way that's like actually loving, rather than like you said, you're going to hell for this, that, and the other. And I think there are a lot of people out there that's kind of how they start off, what we call evangelism, is they just kind of start off like, here's all these things that you're wrong about and that you've done wrong and that have damned you to hell. And I'm just like, sometimes truth is not necessary, in that sense. And I do think it is necessary at a time, because obviously truth is what we, the way that the world works, we have to all kind of, there is one truth, right? Whether you're right or whether I'm right, there's somebody is right.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think we'd agree on that. It's not just all, this person goes to this heaven, this person goes to this heaven based on what's right. That would defy every law of science. And, so there's got to be something that's right, whether atheists are right or whether Christians are right or somebody in the middle.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I do believe there is a hell, and I do believe there is consequences. But where I differ from a lot of other Christians in that I don't like to stress that point. I like to try to, because the gospel is about hope, right? The gospel is about the ability to actually live with God and be in communion with Him. And I think a lot of people kind of start from the opposite of that premise, which is like hell. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't understand about hell itself, because I don't think the church has done a very good job of explaining it to people, is that hell is not, as much as it's a punishment for sins, which is what we call it, the Bible would describe it in one passage at least as a separation from God. Now, separation from God's goodness, right? So God is, we would believe God to be good and all things just and holy. And so basically what it is in my mind is that, if you live your life saying, I want nothing to do with God, I don't believe in Him, or I don't care enough to come into communion with Him or anything like that, basically what hell is just a separation from that. So He basically can still conform, He still gives you your free will even after death. And He says, okay, if you've lived your life this way, you've said you want nothing to do with me, here is a place that has, where I am not, at least His goodness. The Bible describes Him, God as being present in hell and to an extent, but not His goodness, not all of the good attributes that you and I can know here on earth. And so that's where I think the difference is between a lot of people and the failure to explain that is it's not necessarily God sending you to hell. It's basically Him just saying, okay, you wanted nothing to do with me. Here's a place where I literally am not. Right. And so with that in mind, obviously you would disagree with the premise of there even being a heaven and hell. But that's just kind of explain that and get that on the table, at least as far as, my understanding of it. So if there is no heaven and hell, there is no afterlife, but you believe there is a higher power, how do you kind of put those two together? Because in my mind, everybody that believes in a higher power believes that there's got to be souls within people, which is kind of going back to the morality, kind of what gives you the moral compass, so to speak. And, naturalists, people that believe in evolution, would argue that there is nothing beyond, the material and stuff. And so they would usually come to that conclusion that there's nothing after death other than just non-existence. So how do you put those two together, I guess?
Well, I guess I would kind of relate it to, I guess there's not always a reward or something at the end of the tunnel. I've done people wrong, and I've done great things for people. I think at the end of the day, I'm just trying to do the best I can. Yeah. And I would hope, and like I said, I when this all comes to an end, I don't think I'm going to be rewarded with a great place or sent to an awful place. I think it's just going to come to an end. Yeah. And I think it goes back to the individual. I think I should I'm trying to do the best I can for me and obviously the people around me. But yeah, I just, I don't know. I guess like I said, I don't think there's a reward at the end of the tunnel. I think just try and do the best you can with what you got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a fair way to put it, because I mean, I think you're already a step further than most people in that sense, because going again, there's too many people out there that they just don't have any personal responsibility. I guess for me, I still have a hard time grasping how you could believe that there's a God or a higher power rather, and not believe. So do you believe there's anything immaterial inside you? Or do you think that you're just flesh and bones?
Like a soul or something like that?
A soul or a spirit.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I think, when you do something that makes you feel good, I think it's chemicals in your body that make you feel good. I think it's, the opposite for when you do things that are bad and when things make you feel bad. And I don't think...
So how do you think that that ultimate morality that we talked about, how do you think that gets inside someone? How do you think that is it just simply taught then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it could be. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it could just be from experience.
Okay.
You pick up all sorts of things that you don't realize you're picking up when you're young.
Yeah.
It could be from that. It could be the way you're taught. Mm-hmm. Could just be life lessons. Who knows, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those topics where like you can think about it all day long. And I mean, even somebody, I still have to refer back to something, there's not really a science, I guess I would say, that proves one way or the other.
Right.
There might be some scientists out there that claim that everything is material and that they have proof for it. I would disagree with it, but I think the vast majority of people would agree that you have to just kind of make that decision for yourself. Like, it's nothing that somebody's going to be able to prove to you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And that even comes down to like salvation and people that actually do decide to walk with the Lord and stuff like that. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine years ago, back when I worked a factory job. We were just walking, shooting the breeze, and somehow we got on the topic of religion, and he was an atheist, basically, I think, is what he kind of was anyway. And he said a comment to me, and I was kind of preaching to him, and he was like, you're not going to convince me that God's real. You're not going to convince me. And it kind of hit me at that point. I was like, you're right, because when I decided to take that step from just going to church and just calling myself a Christian and knowing blatantly that I was not in any way following, what the scriptures talk about. It was nothing that somebody said to convince me. It was nothing like, some overwhelming speech where I was like, oh yeah, I get it now. It was really just like one of those things where it's like, we would call it the spirit moving within you. And then it's just kind of like, it was just a God thing, I don't know how else to describe it. And I kind of had that realization when I was talking to him. I was like, you're right. I was like, I can't convince you. There's nothing I can say necessarily, not to say that I shouldn't at least explain it.
Right.
But there's nothing I can say to convince somebody. Like, it really has to be God, to spark that within you. I think most Christians would be able to attest to that, it was never anything where it's like, oh, I'm convinced of it all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And you just all of a sudden find it rational, because it's not really rational. I mean, it is once you really dive into it, but no, I don't think anybody, at least that I've ever talked to, that like becomes a Christian is like, I would just like was thinking rationally and all of a sudden decided there was a God, you know what I mean? Because it does seem irrational to an extent until you really start to dive into it. And most people, look really closely at it. And even then you still kind of look at it with a bias, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Everybody does. So,
yeah.
Do you have any questions for me maybe, or anything you can think of?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, I really appreciated this conversation.
Yeah.
It was good. I think it's always good to be able to just talk things through, and even just, like I said, we hadn't talked in years, and even before we had talked, I don't think we ever really had any too many deep conversations.
About that on the way here. I don't think we ever actually sat down and talked before.
Right. Yeah. It was just kind of like, hey, how are you? Sort of thing. I remember one night, I think what did we were like friendlies or something after a show. We all went to friendlies. That was like the time that we like had conversed the most.
Yeah.
It was still just small talk stuff.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
So it was cool getting to be able to, hear your side of things and,
Yeah.
and get to know you a little bit better. And,
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me over.
Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate it. So, well, thanks guys for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this conversation, really appreciate any support, whether you're watching it or subscribing to the YouTube channel or anything like that. Really appreciate all and any support. So we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again next week, hopefully. Thanks.